experiment pits a wrestler in a mask against a vampire and way too much eyeshadow. Enter the nonsensical Mexican dreamscape of Santo in the Treasure of Dracula. Flushed in the movie!
This time we watched Season 13, Episode 1, Santo in the Treasure of Dracula.
It's a classic rivalry, Nosferatu versus El Luchador.
But first, some follow-up. Want to thank everybody who wrote in or tweeted at us with nice words to send Adam off. Everybody was very kind and very appreciative of everything he's done for the show. We've sent your words to him. He was very touched. We were very touched. Thank you. Thank you.
Whenever you see a wild Donald Pleasance in the forest, just take a moment and think about our sweet Adam.
I was watching some random video the other day, and randomly Donald Pleasance got mentioned halfway through it. And a photo that I know very well popped up. And I was like, oh, this is meaningful to me because of Adam. In other news, oh boy, a lot has been going on in MST3K land. And we are not a news program. We record only occasionally, and it takes us a while to edit them and so forth. And so by the time anything comes out, everything's already happened. But since last we sat down to speak, another episode, Robot Wars, aired, which was not a pleasant movie, but a pretty fun episode, I guess. Did you have a chance to see that one?
I haven't actually. So it's a bad movie, but a good riff experience.
It's a bad movie. It's a pretty good riff. It was just an unpleasant movie. Maybe when I rewatch it, I'll be accustomed to the movie and it won't affect me so much. That sometimes happens with some of these.
What could be unpleasant about Robot Wars?
Well, there aren't any. Also, like, there's one of those. It's like an 80s movie, and like the male love interest for our female protagonist is absolutely an asshole.
Okay.
Just the biggest jerk, and it's just. It's real unpleasant 80s misogyny going on there. And of course, by the end, spoiler alert, they fall in love because the movie doesn't have to tell you because he's a guy and therefore they fall in love. But yeah, that happened. And then the Mads did another evening of shorts, which was pretty fun. And the Gizmoplex is about to get out of its soft launch phase and properly show us the episodes, the presumably very finished versions of the episodes. So that'll be happening. And season 13, episode 3 will be airing soon, which is very exciting because it looks like that's going to be the first episode with Emily as the main host.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And if you want to watch it, and you already signed up for the Gizmoplex, but you find that chatting with everybody is a little bit overwhelming, as I do, that's cool. If you're supporting us on Patreon, you can hang out in our members-only Slack. We've been watching the first 2 episodes live together, as well as the short. It's been a lot of fun. We get very excited, and it isn't nearly as overwhelming as all the thousands of people chatting at once in the Gizmoplex.
Yeah, I maybe this is where we're showing our age, but I found that overwhelming. I've joined a couple of Discords for some popular essayists, and it's just like, I don't know how you keep up with the trail of conversation going. So ours is much smaller, more intimate, and I think easier to handle. So
yeah. No, definitely I find these communities have to be only so big. I've been in ones that are pretty big, and still there's just enough for me to like follow the categories that I'm interested in, but there's a certain point at which I just can't. Oh well,
we're too old.
We're very old. We're so old. I'm getting older every day, it feels like.
Sorry, just coughing up some coffin dust.
Speaking of coffin dust, I guess we should talk about today's movie.
All right, let's dig something up. This time we watched Season 13, Episode 1, Santo in the Treasure of Dracula. Dr. Cesar Sepulveda, nuclear physicist, has assembled the finest scientific minds in order to show off his friend's latest invention, a time machine. The time machine has been made by, of all people, Santo, a masked wrestler who moonlights as a crime fighter and, I guess, a theoretical physicist. What is remarkable about this particular time machine is that it doesn't send people back into the past, but it instead sends its passenger into a previous life. The scientists don't believe it'll work, so Santo and Dr. Sepulveda must find a willing test subject amongst themselves. The professor's comely daughter Louisa volunteers as the ideal candidate, for, Santo declares, women have greater physical and mental resilience than a man would. So, with that sentence, all accusations of sexism against this movie have been powerfully defeated. In the meantime, unbeknownst to the group, an even more ridiculous wrestling figure, a black cowl and fez, spies on the proceedings as Louisa is sent back into a previous life, Louisa Solar. Professor Sepulveda and Santo watch on the Time TV, learning that this particular Louisa has been suffering from a mysterious illness that involves fatigue, anemia, and prominent crusty neck holes. Her father, another professor, calls in an old friend, Van Roth, to help find the cause. And you should be picking up what this movie is putting down by now. Louisa Solar is Mina Harker, and Van Roth is Van Helsing the vampire hunter, and Dracula is Dracula. The unmasked Count Alucard, it's Dracula backwards, makes Louisa one of his vampire wives. But no sooner has he tucked his new wife into bed than Van Roth and Professor Solar discover their crypt, stake Dracula, and make ready to stake the slumbering Louisa. Alarmed that this might mean the death of their Louisa as well, Santo and Sepulveda manage to bring her back just in time. So apparently during all of that, there was some mention of Dracula's massive treasure, which Santo and Sepulveda want to retrieve to provide proof of the time machine's efficacy. This sets off a series of events, a bit too tedious to go into in great detail, but rest assured it involves a lot of vampire jewelry, revived Draculas, and of course, lots and lots of wrestling. But surprisingly, Santos does not save the current timeline's Louisa from becoming Dracula's again wife by double suplexing the Count in the ring. Instead, he and his wrestling friends blow up the top of his crypt and expose him to sunlight. The vampires are disintegrated and everyone is saved. Santo concludes his adventure by realizing that he should never have tampered in God's domain. That humans should never enter the world of the unknown. The end.
Meanwhile, on the Satellite of Love. Well, after the shenanigans that Jonah and the bots pulled at the end of Season 12, Moon 13 has been destroyed. And so we begin Season 13 with Kinga and Max on the surface at Moon 1. For the invention exchange, Jonah made it so that Crow can blink, whereas the Mads have built the Kinga Dome, the building that holds the Gizmoplex, the new MST3K streaming service. So that's neat. After some movie, Tom is reading from Jonah's yearbook in order to find some embarrassing secrets about him. But everything seems happy and wholesome, and where's the fun in that? Except it turns out it wasn't Jonah's yearbook at all. Wah, wah. Anyway, after some more movie, Jonah is dressed up as Santo, and GPC is Real Housewife of Beverly Hills, Lisa Rinna, and they present QV Santo, on which they sell a bunch of junk that they claim will help ward off cryptids. Max excitedly buys it all. Oh, and they throw to an intermission during which Jonah and the bots do a few commercials that were sold off during the Kickstarter. And look, I'm not going to summarize the commercials, okay? But, After yet more movie, Jonah is emceeing a pre-fight face-off between two wrestlers, the Clear Crusader, i.e. Tom, and Alexander Slam Bell, or Crow. In gruff and rowdy wrestler voices, the two opponents brutally compliment each other. And finally, once the movie is over, it's time to celebrate everyone's favorite character, Perico. They sing a little ditty about how great El Santo's sidekick is, and a Perico Forever banner is unfurled. Meanwhile, back on Moon 1, the Kinga Dome is going to be hit by a meteor shower. A meteor shower. And thunk, a meteor tears a hole into the Kinga Dome's roof. Oh no, Max and Kinga now will have to turn to Dr. Cabal, the mysterious financier from the future. What will happen next? Tune in to the next episode, Robot Wars, to find out. But for now, this is the end. Well. Some of us paid good money to make this season happen, and it's happening, and how do we feel about it?
I think it's a nice start. It doesn't quite have the bombast that the relaunch did for Netflix, but maybe that's good because there was kind of a frenetic, nervous energy and a lot of sense of expectation, like we've got to get this right. which turned out to be correct because they canceled them very quickly. And I get the feeling that this is better for a production like MST3K that sometimes takes a while to get back on its feet, and to have less pressure to do that. It had a more lived-in feel. It felt kind of genuinely low budget and scrappy in a way that, is very true to its roots. I thought it was a good start.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree. They had a few practice runs during the Netflix era, but there was always something a little bit too glitzy, glamorous, and also like, we need this to work, therefore we're desperate, therefore we're shoving in as many jokes as possible, therefore, we're going to have special celebrity guests, whether they sort of jive with the show or not, therefore we're going to do this, that, and other thing. And like, there are plenty of Netflix era episodes that I like, but I'm finding the vibe of season 13 to be much more what I want from the show. It does feel a little bit calmer. It actually felt like three people hanging out together, watching a movie. It didn't feel like there were three people watching a movie shouting jokes at me the whole time, desperate for me to laugh. I don't know. I appreciated that. I appreciated the made by people for people kind of vibe of it.
Oh,
whoa!
Sorry. Jesus.
So yeah, it was super nice. I think also that was underlined by the fact that, we watched the soft launch of it, and famously now, for those who watched it and pay attention to the MST3K trade, there are a lot of technical difficulties at the kickstart of this episode. The show started with Joel in his office welcoming us and being all excited and introducing the episode, and then cut to the show, and then we got like 3 frames of the opening credits or something, and it just shut down and got replaced with a white dot. And that white dot was on the screen for about 15 minutes.
That became a character in itself.
Yeah, exactly. And Chiron messages kept popping up saying, we don't, we're working on it. Of course, this happened at our launch. We promised this worked in rehearsal, etc. It was very charming, honestly.
Yeah,
I think
very sweet.
I think it couldn't have gone better.
Yeah, at one point you hear you just have this, dead screen, and then you hear Joel come on, and very Joel is like, "Hey guys, we're going to get through this. We're just working on it. Shouldn't be too much longer." I love that we got that update. It felt so intimate.
Yeah. At some point, you can hear someone frantically typing before the first Chiron message comes up. It's really good. It was really sweet, and miles away from, again, the very polished professionalism of Netflix, but also sort of the lack of care that Netflix has shown to its viewership and audience. But yeah, and I think it was a great movie for them to start on.
Yeah, because that's it. I mean, one of my favorite moments from the old series was when they did Santos versus the Vampire Women, and you see Santos coming for the first time in his cowl and cape, and you just hear them all crack up.
Yeah.
Just like, oh God, like it was just such a genuine moment of what is this, so it's nice to see him back because he's well beloved because of that particular episode.
Yeah, of course, which of course was the episode that Frank left the show on, and I have always understood that they did that movie simply because Frank really liked Santo movies and luchador movies, and so they made sure to send him off with one, which was great. And it's good that they finally came back to that because plenty of good stuff there, I believe. Although we'll get onto that in a moment. But yeah, it's just a weird movie in all sorts of great ways, and I think they couldn't have chosen a better one. The fact that sort of like in fact, in some ways, it's a lot like Riding with Death, which we looked at last episode, in that quite a lot of the movie is just some characters from the movie watching the movie on a TV.
Yeah, it's got one hell of a framing device.
Yeah.
At a certain point, I'm just like, are we going to go back to the original characters? Because they were really just letting it ride.
I really thought at first that we were just going to have Santo watching the whole thing. And it was like Santo watches the Treasure of Dracula. And it was some weird thing where they got the rights to a very short movie and decided to add Santo to buff the length and make it feature length.
That really is what it felt like. They just had another property and they decided to just package it with Santos on the other side, and it would end and he would just be like, they tampered in God's domain, and that's the end of it.
Exactly. But nope, the threads tie up eventually, so it all works out. This is all on purpose this time.
They reuse all the sets,
Yep. They take a few of the scenes of transition when she goes through time to the past, and they just play it backwards to bring her back to the present, and that's good. In addition to that, though, it's also like Riding with Death because, of course, it's based on a classic late 19th century novel, and in this case, Dracula, as opposed to The Invisible Man.
Very loosely, yes.
Very loosely. But also, they don't, put it in the credits that it's based on Bram Stoker's Dracula. You just know at that point, and it's much truer to Dracula than Riding with Death was to The Invisible Man. But we'll talk about that in a bit as well, I suppose.
Yeah, it's the fact that Dracula has become his own character outside the book, that you don't really need to reference him anymore, right? It's like Sherlock Holmes, he's from Arthur Conan Doyle, but he just kind of lives as his own mythological presence in our culture, right?
Exactly. Was there anything else in the movie that you particularly enjoyed?
So apparently this movie was circulating for the most part in black and white, and it was colorized quite recently. The colors are garbage, I gotta say, but in a wonderful way, where it's just like, her hair could never be that color.
So that's not true.
Really?
The film was filmed in color. It was mostly distributed in black and white, however, and most of the surviving prints were in black and white. There was a version that tried to restore it, and they tweaked the color and added a new dub, and apparently that color correction version is terrible. And I don't know if that's what we've got. The dub of this movie is very strange because, unlike most dubs I've seen, everyone has a Mexican accent.
Sort of. There's a few that go in and out, but yes,
Yeah.
It's still stilted and bad, but at least they have, accents.
Yeah, so I don't know if this is the act. I was trying to find this information out, and I couldn't. And listeners, if you know, please let me know. I'd love to find out. But I can't tell if these are the actual original actors or people connected with it who speak English well enough to do the dub. Is that Santo's voice? I don't know. But I kind of doubt it, but I saw somebody saying it sounds like him, so I don't know. It's a very strange choice. It's fine, it's perfectly fine. It's not like they're incomprehensible. It's just not the choice that most dubbers make.
It's hard to tell if this is really what the 60s looked like, because I see a lot of interiors in these MST3K movies from the 60s, and the colorization is always like, it couldn't have been that garish. Did they really do those colors together? Why are there so many oranges and putrid greens and browns? Who could live this way? So that was kind of what I fell into. But it gives the movie a strange, when you go back into the past, it's like, well, why is this Victorian mansion covered in garish oranges and day-glow greens, but is all the more charming because they didn't bother to fix anything?
The other thing about the movie that I quite liked was the best character, Perico, who's just... It's so rare in these movies for me to enjoy the comic relief most, I feel like. Sometimes it happens. I think it's happened at least once before on this show, and I don't even think that Perico is terribly funny when he's doing his funny bits, but he's got some sort of charisma. The camera loves Perico.
Exactly. And he has this strange, when we're talking about the 60s, he's a very 60s character. He has this kind of Jerry Lewis, kind of Andy Warhol vibe to him.
Yeah.
And I love his giant $sign necklace.
His giant $sign necklace, his giant-ass glasses, his hyper-fashionable clothing choices that he never changes out of. It's great. He's a cartoon character, as is Santo, as is all of this, of course. That's sort of the point. But it's a remarkable choice. It's not quite the way that I would have imagined the sidekick to go in this.
Well, he feels very Hanna-Barbera, doesn't he? This is before, Scooby and the Big Gang, but he has a very shaggy feel to him, but he dresses like Fred.
I suppose so. He does feel a bit Hanna-Barbera, yeah. And, of course, Santo constantly mistreats him. The whole point of the movie is, in terms of Perico, is that Perico is not very manly, quote unquote. He is too scared to go on any of the adventures, and yet they force him to anyways, and at one point sort of berate him for not being much of a man. And it's like, why? Why are you being such a jerk, Santo? Just let Perico be. Why are you dragging him along? He's not very good at this. You seem oblivious to his inability and lack of desire to do this, but you're just steamrolling over it anyways.
I mean, the whole point is for him to kind of bolster up the Santos masculinity brand, right? Which is very I was reading some stuff that talk about his gravitas, and he's got kind of a fatherly vibe. That actually I found to be a bit confusing. Apparently in these movies, the shtick of it is he's usually helping some professor, and he falls in love with the professor's daughter or niece or assistant. And so were he and Louisa supposed to be a couple in this?
Yeah, I don't know.
He holds her sometimes, and I'm like, but his vibe always seemed very protective and fatherly, and I'm just like, what's going on here? Because it feels like a sequel to some extent. Like, he already knows his professor, he always knows this Louisa. Louisa's already been paired off with a child orphan, which is also apparently something that always happens in the movie. His love interest gets paired with a girl urchin that she adopts.
Right.
So all of that has already happened. So like, they could even be married. I don't know. Like, it's very unclear what the relationship it is. And I wonder if it's to some extent like he was a great deal older than her, and at this point, like,
I doubt that's it.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, we'll talk about Santo again in a little bit, but I think in this case, it's because she gets married to Dracula, and they don't want that. They don't want bigamy involved in this at all. So there has to be that weird separation where this is clearly meant to be the love interest, but the plot dictates something else.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
That would be my guess. I don't know. I just want to say Perico. He's great. I'm glad they did a little song about him at the end.
They were right to put the spotlight on that guy.
Yeah, exactly. Also, one of the sketches was amazing in this episode, which is to say the wrestling voice being nice to each other instead of trash talking skit.
No, that was lovely. They were very sweet to each other.
Good. I mean, Tom especially is really the MVP here, but it's so good to hear people on those, oh, brother, I'm going to get you, brother. But be like, oh, I'm going to come over to your house and I'm going to help you clean up the backyard kind of stuff. It's just so sweet and funny. And they're just, okay. I guess part of it is also that they're being so nice to each other, which is a mode of interaction that they never really do in like the sci-fi era at that point, where they're always just sarcastic and mean to each other all the time. So this idea where they're like in a scenario where they're supposed to be mean to each other, but they're actually quite sweet to each other, it's just like, yeah, that's just the vibe I want from MST3K. Can season 13 be more about these people liking each other?
Yeah, I really actually hope that that's something they bring on, because as you said, it's returning to, I think, what was always so kind of low key. The best things about MST3K was the weird dynamics between everybody, that they were a family,
Certainly in the Joel era.
Certainly in the Joel area.
The Joel area.
That little spot on the carpet. Oh no, that's
We're not talking about Joel's area. Nope, shutting it down. But yes, Santo. What do you know about Santo?
I did a little bit of reading.
But had you known about him beforehand? Or is this like your only experience with him is through these two movies?
Through the first movie, Samson versus the Vampire Women, I learned about luchadors and the fact that it's like a special kind of version of wrestling that is very popular in Mexico, which involves everybody wearing these like full head masks, and that it's a much more acrobatic version of wrestling than you get in like American or Japanese wrestling, which I thought was kind of cool. I was like, oh, I maybe want to check this out sometime. Didn't seem all that acrobatic in either of the movies, I gotta say, but no, I didn't know anything about Santos himself, and it wasn't until I did some more reading for this movie that I realized, oh, he was a big deal.
Oh, yeah. So I knew about Santo. I didn't grow up watching... Well, I grew up watching wrestling in the sense that I was a kid in the 80s, and therefore it was ambiently on. Like my older stepbrother, when he was 13, he'd be watching the wrestling, the Hulk Hogan and such, every
Ultimate
weekend.
Warrior, yeah. I mean,
yeah. So I picked up a bit of that ambiently, and it just seemed like a thing that I was supposed to do. I didn't particularly care, as you might imagine. I didn't know about El Santo then, but by the time I was a teenager living in New York, you would see or encounter El Santo sometimes just on T-shirts, but also just like people knew about him. So I heard people talking about him somewhat, and it wasn't until I saw the MST3K that I really properly got exposed to him, I guess. But yeah, I've sort of, he's big enough that even I've heard of him. Let's put it that way.
He missed me, but I think I might be too many cultural plates removed from that particular dish. So,
yes.
But it sounds fascinating, and I really enjoyed learning more about it.
Yeah, he's an interesting person, it seems like. I mean, it's hard to say because he fell into the role of Santo so fully. I guess we should say he was born in the 1917-ish, I believe.
Or perhaps 1915.
Something like that. Yeah, it's exactly. It's a bit mysterious, I suppose. He started wrestling in the 30s. Some of his brothers were wrestlers. He had a few different identities at first, trying to figure out which one is the right one for him. One of his early names was El Murcielago, the Bat, sort of like Batman or, Batwoman that we're going to see a little bit later this season. But another wrestler already had that name, so he was told he had to give it up. And his manager suggested that he could be the Saint, the Devil, or the Angel. And he picked El Santo, the Saint, which eventually just became Santo.
Which obviously, silver cow, that's a saint, It's you're going back to some real Catholic iconography there.
Of course. So Santo makes his debut in 1942, and he's, working his way up the wrestling rung ladder, I guess. I don't know. What do you call that? He's making a name for himself. He's wrestling and wrestling and wrestling, and he's having some success, and he's getting bigger and bigger. And then in the 1950s, a little thing called television becomes popular. And you know what looks good on television? Lucha Libre.
Was it television or was it movies that really broke for him?
It was television that broke him within Mexico. Okay. And he was there when Lucha Libre became big. It's sort of that's my understanding of it, at least. I'm not an expert, etc. But from what I've been able to read, Lucha Libre became very big on TV, and Santo was in many ways the face or the mask of Lucha Libre. And so he gets eventually turned into a comic character, and then he's asked to be in a few films at the end of the 50s.
Right. And we should mention at this point that when he became El Santo, he fully committed that he was never seen in public without the mask.
Yeah, he wore the mask all the time. There's a rumor that when he would fly, he flew separately from everybody he knew, so that if he had to show his face at customs or something, that no one who knew who he was would see his actual face. But he spent all of his public appearances in his mask. More on that in a second. But yes, so he really committed to it, right? That was who he was. He's married at this point. He has a wife and what would be, I think, 10 kids.
Can you imagine the family portrait?
Yeah, exactly. I've seen plenty of luchador family portraits in art and so forth. So yes, I guess I can imagine it, but it's wild. And I have no idea if he ever took the mask off at home. Did he sleep in the mask? Is it something that was special for his wife to see his face? Did his children really know it? I have no idea.
Was he like the Phantom of the Opera, but a luchador instead of a Parisian undermonster?
Exactly. It's so wild, but I really enjoy. I don't know if I'd ever want to do that, but I really enjoy how much he committed to that character. In the 50s, he was asked to be in a few films. And he was like a sidekick cop in the first few of them. But things started getting really popular when he was given a lead role in 1961's Santo versus the Zombies, which is also the introduction of his persona of wrestler by day, crime fighter at night.
Monster Hunter.
Sometimes Monster Hunter, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Monster Hunter, also apparently physicist also.
Yeah, I think this is the first movie where he becomes a physicist, although he put out a lot of movies. And I certainly haven't seen any of them that haven't been on MST3K, and most of them weren't dubbed into English. So I'm absolutely not an expert on this. But it's weird. It's weird that he's Batman, but a wrestler.
Basically. Except for he doesn't have a vendetta. He's just a good guy.
No, that's true. There's nothing like the backstory that you could milk for it. He's just the saint. The most famous of his movies seems to have been Samson versus the Vampire Women.
That's so weird.
I know. I have no idea. I don't know whether it was a particularly weird English dub or something that made it look as iffy. But again, this is sort of the point of these movies, right? They're not like serious movies in that sense. They're very silly, kid-friendly, family-friendly movies about, the good guy fighting the bad guys kind of thing. Let's see. What else was I going to say? Oh, yes. After his retirement, which happened in the early 80s, after he went unconscious in the ring once and he had to step down from active wrestling and have some operations. But he appeared on a talk show in January of 1984 and unexpectedly, apparently, took his mask off just enough to look in the cameras and show everyone his face, which is the only recorded time that he had done that in public. And it's the only photo of his face without the mask that we have. And then he passed away a week later.
Wow, what a way to go.
Yeah.
There's a real poetry to this man's commitment.
Exactly. Like if this was a short story, you'd be like, no, that's too on the nose. Come on.
And also just speaks to the control he had over his own persona. He must have known, and he's just like, well, this is how it will go. This very human moment before the end.
Yeah, that's the theory that a lot of people have. There's no obvious evidence for it, but his health was definitely not great. So who knows? And it doesn't seem like anybody at the show expected him to do this, from what I can tell. I don't know. But it is just a lovely gesture. His funeral was huge, and he was buried in the mask. Of course. Of course he was.
I hope they put a stake into his heart just to be sure.
No. No.
He had a lot of run-ins. That's all I'm saying.
The mask is protection enough, I think. In addition to the legend of El Santo, this movie gives us the legend of Dracula.
In a certain form.
In a certain form. I mean, Dracula. What can we say about Dracula? Well, I couldn't say much because I had never read the book or seen any of the movies.
What?
So I only had the most surface level, like, what has pop culture said? Basically, my information about Dracula mostly came from Count Chocula, but I have started reading Dracula for this episode, and it turns out it's a much longer book than I thought it was. It's longer than any of those H.G. Wells books, I'll tell you that.
It's Victorian, yes, but it's the traditional Victorian where it just goes on and on and on in a beautiful way.
Yeah, I'm about halfway through it. It's great. It's a lot of fun. I did not realize it was going to be as much fun as it is.
Even though it's technically a Gothic novel because it deals with the supernatural, it brings a lot of its influence from sensation novels from like the mid-19th century. The Woman in White is one of the most well-known examples by Wilkie Collins. If you're not familiar with sensation novels, you should really give them a try. They're so much fun, and they have they're real masteries in plotting. Like they became very good at just like, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? And just like keeping you going for chapter after chapter after chapter. And I feel like Bram Stoker has gotten that pacing down really well.
Yeah. He's also doing the thing which a lot of 19th century novels do, where he's constantly switching what mode of writing he's doing. So it starts off as a diary, and then it becomes someone else's diary, and then there's newspaper clippings, and then there's letters, and then there's this, and then the other thing. And it's like, yeah, like it's fun. Lots of different voices. All of it is sort of meant to be organically like explained within the logic of the universe. Like the book that you're reading is a book that exists within the novel. It's being put together by one of the characters, and it allows him to show off different registers and different voices and different, types of writing and different, different reasons why people would be writing.
Mm-hmm. Highly unlikely in most of those cases, but
yeah, sure. but it's an interesting technique, and he really gets to play around with that, and it's a lot of fun. Is it a profound book?
No.
Yeah, I mentioned I was reading it to my husband, and he's like, oh yeah, Dracula and Frankenstein, he read them in like grad school, I guess, and Dracula was a lot of fun. Frankenstein was the book that lingered with him in terms of like having interesting things to think about and say.
Right. I agree with that entirely. Frankenstein has some more profound things to say about what it means to be human and responsibility for one's own creation. Dracula is just a fun romance novel. Its power is in creating not only a cool monster, but having really fun rules about how that monster works that people can play with, right? Like he has all these great powers, but he also, can't handle garlic, and so like that becomes such a fun template for people to bring into their own worlds or their own fictions. And so I think that's one of the reasons why Dracula and vampires became such a long-lasting and compelling monster. And you haven't seen the movie, which is incredible.
Now, which movie do you mean?
Bram Stoker's 1992 Dracula with Winona Ryder and Keanu Reeves and Gary Oldman and Anthony Hopkins.
Okay, no, I have not. I've not seen either of them, but I haven't seen that one.
I mean, it shouldn't be called Bram Stoker's Dracula because it's really Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula. Very, very much a Coppola movie. It's gorgeous. It's sexy. It's hilarious. If you haven't seen it, I would really check it out.
does it sort of get into all the weird sex stuff that the novel has?
Oh, yes.
That's kind of the thread. Like, if you're going to walk away from it, like, I don't know, writing an undergrad paper about it, it's going to be about the sex stuff.
Well, it's just like the fact that the heroine's best friend, Lucy, who eventually, she's the first who becomes vampired. Like, the weirdness of the fact that she has 3 suitors, like, just gets really blown out in the movie. It's just like, it's kind of weird that these 3 guys are all cool with, like, hanging out, and they become, like, this strange, like, little polyamorous triad as the movie keeps going.
Or quadrat or whatever. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I mean, that's an amazing thing in the novel. Like, there's this one guy that Lucy is like, ooh, I hope maybe something develops there. And then, like, the next letter, she's like, so I got proposed to 3 times today, and it's kind of a lot. And it was really weird because I had decided who I wanted it to be, which is not the person she was talking about in the last letter. And it's like, but then these other 2 people came up and I had to say no to them, but they were very sweet about it. And gosh, I wish I could just marry all 3 of them. But what would that be like? That's silly. And then as soon as she's had this thought, it becomes clear that, like, had she proposed this and had society been structured differently, the guys would have been totally down. Because the first thing that one of them's like a Texan, oil baron type or something. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But the first thing he does after he's said no to is he goes to the other guy who has been turned down and says, well, we've both been turned down by the greatest woman ever. I guess we should start hanging out a lot. And so they do.
Yeah, no, it's incredible.
It's so good. Oh my God. And like, that's amazing. The whole opening sequence with Jonathan Harker, who it turns out, I should also say, I didn't know a lot of the details of the plot of Dracula. I did not realize it was about real estate. I did not realize that Jonathan Harker was a new lawyer who was going to Transylvania because Dracula was buying a house in England. And like this whole side of things, I did not understand. But fine. Harker shows up. Dracula's very polite to him, and then suddenly, gets a little bit less polite as Harker realizes that he's actually trapped there. And he is so worried. He's so thinking about his fiancée Mina back home, but he's so worried about this hairy, mustachioed man, not usually how Dracula's depicted these days, but fine, penetrating him.
Yeah.
And changing him by doing so. And then one day, as he's wandering around Dracula's castle, he stumbles upon 3 vampire women, all of whom start going, ooh, we could have some fun with you, little boy. And he's like, just think of Mina, just think of Mina, just think of Mina. And then Dracula comes in and says, no, he's mine. I told you. Yeah. It's like, oh my God, what is going on here?
Oh, yeah. Chris, see the movie. Just trust me on this.
I mean, cool. All right, maybe I will for that. But I am like more than happy with the fact that it's portrayed so bluntly for end of the 19th century.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, this is why you read Gothic romances, because they're just bursting with big, strong feelings.
Hey, everybody, it's time for the Shallow 13.
It's time for the Shallow 13. 13 bite-sized and blood-sucking facts about today's experiment, Santo in the Treasure of Dracula. Go, Chris, go.
Santo in the Treasure of Dracula was directed by René Cardona, a prolific filmmaker based in Mexico who graced us with over 100 films, including The Batwoman, which will be featured later this season, but which I watched and talked about for our episode on the Wild Wild World of Batwoman, as well as Santa Claus, which, of course, you know, was riffed in Season 5.
This is the acting debut of Alberto Rojas, who plays our beloved Perico. But it wouldn't be his last film. Oh no. Rojas, who had the nickname El Caballo, the horse, acted in and directed dozens of films in his lifetime, becoming, we are told, one of the most recognized faces in the Mexican erotic comedy genre. Or, as it's known in Spanish, La Sexy Comedia.
One of Rojas's later films from 1999 is called Bill Griton versus Monica del Whiskey. Apparently there's a scandal at the White Cup. Yeah. And just in case you don't know, Griton means something like loud mouth. Anyway, I'm sure this was trenchant political satire and or a very appropriate sexy commedia, but I couldn't find anyone on the internet who admitted to actually watching this movie.
On to our vampires. Were you confused as I was that Dracula apparently cannot abide mistletoe? Mistletoe is apparently sometimes referred to as the vampire plant because the 1,500 or so varieties are either parasitic or hemiparasitic, which means they need a host from which they can take all or most of their nutrients. When bird droppings containing an undigested mistletoe seed land on a suitable branch, the germinating seedling extends a root-like structure called a haustoria, which penetrates deep into the host's bark.
And so, like a plant version of Bela Lugosi, these newly formed roots bite into the vascular system of the tree and begin to suck the water and sugars the seedling needs for growth. Now, as to why Dracula cannot seemingly stand to be in the same room as mistletoe, I don't know, maybe he can't stand the competition?
Or, more likely, because of an old legend that Jesus' cross had been made out of mistletoe. At first, this might seem botanically unlikely, but the idea was that God then cursed mistletoe and turned it from a mighty tree into a more parasitic existence. Something like that. It's wild.
The drink of choice in today's movie, in both of its time periods, is cognac.
This movie brought to you by the International Cognac Council.
Now, cognac is pretty nice, don't you think? Cognac is a type of brandy whose production is limited to a specific region in southwestern France, and cognac labels often play up its Frenchness with lots of fleur-de-lis and French icons like Louis XIV and Napoleon.
However, according to a Slate magazine article that we'll link to in the show notes, the French themselves barely touch the stuff. They export most of it, and their biggest customers are Black Americans. In the 90s, cognac had an image of being an old-timey drink, enjoyed by the fusty grandpas seen in today's movie, but then the drink started showing up in rap lyrics. The article points out that Busta Rhymes and P. Diddy's hit Pass the Courvoisier is attributed to causing sales to jump 30%.
The article goes on to argue that Black American soldiers would have first encountered cognac while stationed in France during the World Wars. And as Black artists and musicians like Josephine Baker moved to Paris between the wars and were celebrated in ways that they never got to enjoy back home, this might have bolstered the reputation of the French liqueur.
As the article says, quote, "For African Americans, the elegant cognac of a country that celebrated their culture instead of marginalizing it must have tasted sweet. Back in the States, the more common option was whiskey, a spirit made by companies that named brands after Confederate leaders or appealed to Southern nationalism with labels such as Rebel Yell. It's no wonder many African Americans found that cognac left a better taste in their mouths."
But what is it doing here in Mexico? Well, it turns out that brandy became the sophisticated drink of choice in Mexico sometime around the early 60s, after brandy production in Mexico began to ramp up. And it was not just sophisticated, but it was also very popular. There's cheap brandy out there too. It was in fact the most popular spirit in Mexico, even more popular than like tequila. It's entirely possible that what they're drinking in the movie isn't even French cognac, but Mexican brandy.
As Louisa spirals back into the present, Crow jokes,
"This has been a Spin and Marty Croft production."
Sid and Marty Croft were two Canadian brothers who created some of the most beguiling television shows of the 1970s and 80s, including HR Pufnstuf and The Land of the Lost. Wait, not were, are. At ages 92 and 85 respectively, Sid and Marty Croft are still very much with us.
And in fact, a few years ago, they helped reboot one of their classic shows, Sigmund and the Sea Monsters, for Amazon Prime. Have we really not devoted a segment to Sid and Marty Croft yet? Huh. Well, next time.
But for now, that's time.
We've got another time machine in this one.
Which means I get to talk about The Time Machine by H.G. Wells again.
Yay!
Well, not really. Our listeners have probably heard enough about that particular novel.
Maybe, yeah. Listeners might remember that we did a cluster of episodes about time travel experiments back around episode 45 to 47. And I think the Time Machine came up a few times there. I think it's also come up when we've talked about other H.G. Wells inspired works. You just can't get enough of that there Time Machine novel.
So maybe for this particular segment, it might be more interesting to talk about the idea of a time machine.
Put the machine back in Time Machine.
Yeah, so the Time Machine, I think some of the Reddit posters pointed out that the Time Machine in this movie is a lot like the Time Machine in Austin Powers' The Spy That Shagged Me.
It also takes its inspiration from a TV series that was on in 66 to 67 called the Time Tunnel, which also had a kind of tunnel device that they would go through time, and it had a big black and white swirl.
It's very interesting that swirls equal like time vortex or wormhole. But the idea of time travel is not that unusual in literature. So there's a lot of ancient myths that depict a character like skipping through time. So in Hindu mythology, I'm getting this from the Wikipedia, by the way. I haven't read any of these books, but the Vishnu Purana, there's the main character travels to meet the creator Brahma, and when he returns to Earth, he finds that many ages have passed. Something similar happens with Rip Van Winkle, of course. But what I find most interesting is they have it the most accurate to how it would actually happen if there was time travel, because time travel, as most scientists think today, can only happen forwards. And if you do that, if you go into a state, say like visiting the heavens, where perhaps you're moving a little faster than closer to the speed of light, then you would actually your time would slow down compared to other people. So when you return to your own time, you would find that everyone has that the ages have gone past without you. So I found that really cool, that there was never any concept of going back in time before the modern age. Really, at least from what I've seen in literature. In fact, the only one that I can really think of that kind of precedes the time machine, which actually it is also going forward in time, is Mark Twain's A Yankee in King Arthur's Court. Is that how that? I forget.
American Yankee in King Arthur's Court. Yeah.
Yeah, he goes back in time, right?
Yeah, but that's a modern story.
Yeah, but it's older than the time machine, and also people argue that even Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol. Yeah, he goes back in time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But it's more of like a fantasy into your own past, right? It's not the idea that you could change the past by going into the past does not really exists there. So that's one thing that really struck me is this idea of traveling back in time. I feel like is kind of something that gets picked up a lot more in the modern era after the time machine, and more than that you have a machine that will do the time traveling for you, which makes sense because in the 19th century there were so many advances in transportation that were just making it seem like you were traveling through time, like you were being able to move so much more quickly and so much more rapidly than any other time in human history. So that I think messed with people's sense of time quite a bit, and also it made it seem like it was a bit more elastic than otherwise it had ever been before. And also because of course colonialism, when colonists were moving into Africa or other places and meeting hunter-gatherers, one of the ways that they justified, we should conquer these people, is that they're living in an earlier time, they're living in an earlier phase of humanity. And so that also played with the idea of maybe it's possible to live in different time eras in the same time space, so this very strange idea of what you can do with time, and that it became something that could be manipulated, that could have multiple states in the same kind of existence, started to get played with. And so that's why it's so important that it's a machine. Like this is something that can only happen in the space of modern technology. And so I think that is what is brought forward into the 20th century. And what I think is like the kind of apotheosis of this, if I can say this, the apotheosis of this idea is Back to the Future, because it's a literal speedy car that you have to get to a certain speed before it can travel through time, right?
Yeah, so I've heard.
You've never seen them?
No, of course I've seen it.
Okay. You have me super worried there for a minute.
Well, we have run out of time, and we may have run out of things to say about Santo and the Treasure of Dracula, although maybe there's a little bit more we could say. I don't know. Beth, is there one final thing you want to bring to our attention?
One of the things I was hoping to talk about, but there was just not enough time, is they keep using their crypt set over and over again. And I love crypts. I love cemeteries. I love moratoriums. I love mausoleums. I just love the vibe of those spaces. It's not because I'm trying to be an edgy goth girl or anything.
No, you're an edgy goth girl. You're an edgy goth girl. That's all it is.
There's just so few spaces in our modern world that don't, are just not about making the moolah and getting going. And it's just, you sit in these spaces and it's just it's a city of the dead, and they're calm and they're quiet, and it's a place of repose and thinking about what life is and what death is. And every once in a while, I just go to those spaces to kind of reset about what is important and what isn't in life. And I I especially, of course, because I'm a Victorianist, and they loved their cemeteries. So when I was in Europe, one of the things that I made sure to go see is the Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris, which you must go see. A lot of dead people there, a lot of famous dead people there. But it's so old that it has like this creepy vibe. Like literally, and this is something that I found out when they put them in the ground, like when they put the cemetery in the ground, they did not dig them into the ground. They would just put a cap on it. So because this is such an old cemetery, some of those graves got a little bit rooted out by like tree stumps and stuff like that. And you could actually look down into the coffin, which was super cool. And there were cats everywhere. Cats. That's
all right.
You should just go see it for the cats, if anything else. Yes, they run that place. It is the city of the dead and cats.
All right, here I got a few things to say. First off, another city that's run by cats, but not with dead people, is Reykjavik, which I totally recommend. So if you want cats, but you don't necessarily want cemetery, go to Reykjavik. I am not super duper into cemeteries. I'm not a goth girl, I'm afraid. I have been to Paris a few times and have never been to Père Lachaise, and don't expect to go. Maybe if somebody really wanted to, and I was with, and I don't know if I'd like go out of my way to get out of it, but like I'm not super into that. Though I get why people like it. It's just not for me.
So you've never been into the catacombs of Paris either, then?
Oh God, no. Those are creepy, aren't they? They got like skulls everywhere.
Yeah, they're underground and therefore much creepier.
Yeah, no. I got no interest. I mean, I'm glad that in as much as it exists, that I'm glad that people can go visit it. But no, thank you. No.
Not for everybody.
Not for everyone.
So what are you going to do with your body then?
I'll get cremated. That's cool. I don't care what happens after that.
I expect to have a gravesite, and I expect everybody who is still alive and in my circle to come visit and give me some nice flowers.
If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you've got a favorite time machine, or if you'd like to ask us anything, get in touch with us. Our website is itsjustashow.com, and we're on Twitter at itisjustashow. We'd love to hear from you. This show was made possible by listeners just like you. For as little as $1 an episode, you can help us research and record this show, and you can listen to all our superfan bonus bits and hang out with us as we watch the new episodes when they drop. You can find out more at itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And of course, if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned today, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/111.
Well, Chris, we've buried, staked, beheaded, and stuffed this movie full of garlic. What should we do next?
I think next time we are going to look at Season 13, Episode 3, Beyond Atlantis.
Wouldn't that be like a trench of some kind?
Yeah, probably not the Mariana Trench, but some sort of trench. Depends. I don't know. There's lots of different theories about Atlantis.
What is your sense of this movie yet? Have you had any previews? Any hints? Have you already seen it?
I have not seen this movie. It is from the 70s. It takes place in like the Pacific Islands, or maybe Atlantic Islands. I'm thinking about it. We'll see. I don't know anything about it, but what I do know is that it's going to be the first episode with Emily.
I actually have not yet seen any of Mary Jo's or Bridget's work in the theater, so I think this might actually be the first time I see a female lead in the seats. So I really want to check it out.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm totally looking forward to seeing how this plays out, and I think it'll be great. I don't know. I've got very good feelings about this. I'm excited for it. It'll be lots of fun.
Speaking of new female hosts.
Yes. Beth, you may not actually bother watching this episode. Maybe you will. But it's not going to be you talking with me next episode. We're going to have a brand spanking new host to celebrate with Emily.
Get excited, guys.
I'm excited. I mean, we'd love to have Beth, you here forever, but your life is actually very busy, and it was very nice that you were able to take the time out and do these past 2 episodes. And you will be back whenever you want to be and whenever you can be.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, unfortunately, I'm going to have to step back again because life is bonkers, but we have used this opportunity to bring some new blood, some new delicious blood into the podcast.
Yeah, so look forward to that. But until then...
Don't you dare enter the world of the unknown without a sweater.
Perico, you need to leave him. Take it away, Theme Squad.
Hey guys, we're going to get through this.